Yeah. All right. Well, welcome. Good morning. How we doing? Good weekend? What's that?
It was a good Easter.
It was a good Easter. Okay. All right. I heard a out there.
Well, I didn't really do anything.
You didn't do it? Well, that's okay.
I mean, I got some eggs.
You got some eggs?
I threw eggs.
Did you turn them into like hard-boiled eggs or just real eggs in general?
Eggs.
So did you go? Okay, so here we're going to turn this into a big story about eggs. So did you go to the grocery store to get the eggs, or did you go to like the chicken coop to get the eggs?
I don't know if you're able to food, but I can buy it.
Okay, all right. We got to work on that story. We got to make it a little bit more intriguing and all that. Was it? Did you? There's a bear. Okay. All right. This is good. All right. When my wife and daughter was dyeing the eggs, it's interesting how the dye is different when you have different colored eggs. Brown eggs versus white eggs. The dye is different. The brown eggs give it a vintage. So my daughter's like, "Oh, this is like vintage. This is awesome." It's like, I guess I didn't realize all that stuff. So there we go. I don't see too many sunburns out there, so that's good. But hopefully we got outside and enjoyed this weather over the break, 3-day break, all that. My son, though, it's the first year my son was not with us during this past weekend. He decided he's on spring break, so he decided to go to Mexico with some of his college roommates. So we'll see how burnt he is when he comes back, because he's pretty fair skinned. So we'll see all that stuff. So there we go. All right. So with that, we will continue. So with our study of the authoritarians, one thing I came across was the Democracy Index, all right, fairly recent. The Economist Intelligence Unit's 2020 Democracy Index, all right, the EIU Democracy Index. Close it down. So this isn't done by a government agency. It's done by yes.
Why is Mexico not on the map?
It is. It's right here. You just can't, just because of the light in here, you don't see it. It's a lighter shade of blue than ours. All right, so Mexico is on here. On my screen, I see it, but on yours, you don't. I'd have to darken the shades and you will see it. So it's there, just like Central America is here too. It's a good point. And looks like on here, a lot of South America is missing as well. But that's all light blue. And so again, it's not done by a government agency. It's done by The Economist. All right. And so I want to say that because like anything we do, we like to look at the source and kind of evaluate the source. And so The Economist is a magazine that has a news agency that's been around since the 1930s. And this is something they've been doing every year on the state of democracy. And so 1930s was a very tumultuous time. Okay. And so when we look at in the 1930s, it was a rise of some extreme regimes. The Economist, though, when we look at it, it's an international agency. So it wants to give a global perspective. If we look at it, if we talk about biases, it's probably more moderate to perhaps even just a little bit left-leaning. All right, so you can take that into consideration. But when we look at, it's 167 countries, And there's a number of things that go into what they consider democracy, or what they use as indicators. And you'll see that other organizations will tend to look at this index as well. So it's not just them coming up with it for giggles. Other groups will use this index. And so the 5 things that they really look at, they look at the electoral process and pluralism. And pluralism is just an opportunity for lots of different voices out there. The functioning of the government, the political participation, how many people are allowed to participate freely to participate, and freely not to participate because something more important is on television that day. All right, democracy or the democratic political culture. What kind of culture is in that country for political discourse? And then civil liberties. All that's taken into consideration. Smurfy, had your hand go up.
Yeah, I was going to ask what, like, government, most of African.
Well, when we look at, if we go with the color coded, most of the African nations fall in the category of authoritarian regime or hybrid regimes. So hybrid regimes would be, there's a political process, but it may not be open. So in the case of like Uganda, they'll have an election, but the current president has won it like 6 times. Just a rubber stamp in it. So, but when you look at in the Americas, we tend to have either full democracies or flawed democracies, right? And what does that mean to be flawed democracy? So as I'm digging through it, it could be a number of things. For instance, like, the United States, they categorize, the United States had been in 2016 a full democracy, but the Economist is saying by 2020, the United States has moved into a flawed democracy. And again, how you want to interpret that, they look at the United States as our participation has increased in politics, but there has been question marks about that participation that has been raised over the past few years. Trust in institutions and political parties. There seems to be, in this last election, a decline in trust over political parties and our institutions in the United States. Dysfunction in the function of government. All right, and a threat to freedom of expression, as we may have seen in the media, and the evaporation of cohesion, getting together. Being able to have discourse and not escalating into something bigger. Those things. And that's more than, when we talk about the evaporation of cohesion, it's more than just perhaps maybe having a discourse with family members and then all of a sudden unfriend them from Facebook. It could just speak of taking things to another level. So it doesn't necessarily mean the United States is we're spiraling downward, but just some trends that seem to be happening here. So when they look at which in their score and see that it's a scale of 0 to 10, and the number 1 country, according to this index, is Norway. And their indicator was a 9.81. And it's led by Erna Solberg. They have a woman prime minister, and she's been a prime minister since 2013. So she's been there for a little while. She is a conservative, and she has the nickname Iron Erna. She seems to bring on the image of a Margaret Thatcher, who is called the Iron Lady. So, did go a little bit more in depth in that. Of course, no surprise, which is the worst country at number 167, North Korea. That's no surprise there. Barely above a 1 on their scale. The United States is number 25. And that puts us, if we had a number 23 ranking, that would put us in a full democracy. Full democracy. So, there we go. But we have the ability to change all that stuff. So realistically, what we're looking at, they think that there are 23 countries that have full democracy, about 52 that have some type of flawed democracy. So if we look at it, 75 countries are in some type of democratic state. About a third of the country lives, though, under authoritarian rule, though. Right, which is our focus for today. So there we go. Any thoughts on that? Any thoughts? Any thoughts? Okay.
I feel like Turkey's a weird one. Just because like Erdogan,
Yeah.
I feel like it's low. Not like it should be like a win. Really.
So if you take him out of the equation, would they be closer to a flawed democracy?
Yeah.
Okay. And you bring up the Turkey prime minister, the leader, in that he desperately wants Turkey to be kind of be viewed as a legitimate country, wants to be fully engaged in the European Union, the European community, want to be taken seriously on the international scale, but there is enough things that he's doing at home that leads him more in that direction of an authoritarian. Well, that's a good point. That's a good point. However, is Turkey a United States ally? It is. Turkey is the United States ally, but it is tenuous. It's not as rock solid as it used to be, like during the Cold War era. What do you got?
I don't know if this is the biased statement, but my opinion, the more like the nations that are closer to being full democracies are more powerful or I don't know, like the United States or like Britain or France or something like that. They're like more powerful nations versus the like red, orange, and yellow ones. I mean, really, besides China and Russia, can't really name any other.
So we don't see on here. It's a little on yours. It's a little harder to see, but the Eastern Bloc, the old Eastern Bloc countries, fall into this area. Many of these countries had gained their independence after the Second World War. And so their experiences, and this is where we talk about their experiences with Western countries and primarily European countries and industrialized countries, hadn't been the most positive. So they tended to move in a direction away from these types of countries to try different experiments. And they're still working on it, one could say. These countries, remember, are gaining their independence, many of them in the 19th century. This is where you could probably look at the influence of someone like the United States exporting our democracy in the 19th century and influencing that way. So I think it comes down to a history of having a democratic process in democratic institutions. And the degree of control. In many cases in the Western Hemisphere, European colonial powers almost did what we call salutary neglect, left these groups on their own to develop. Especially, one could argue with the British colonies in many ways, left them on their own. And the Spanish colonial powers tried to have strong measures, but that will weaken over time. And more local democratic institutions will become more nurtured as time would progress as we move into the 19th century. Where, if we look in here, colonial rule was more strict. And there were a lot of measures put in place. All right, there we go. So with that, any final thoughts? All right, so what I'm going to do is at this point, I will cut you loose to work on finishing up your case study. And so just bust a move on it. If you need to go out in the hall to do some recording, go for it. Those at home, you can stay on and ask questions, or you can exit and complete this task. Okay?